There is a specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's the kind that finds you in a crowded room, mid-conversation, surrounded by people who seem perfectly content, while something inside you quietly disconnects. You smile, you nod, you say the right things, but you're not really there, because the conversation stopped being interesting 3 minutes ago, and your mind has already moved somewhere else entirely. If you know that feeling, this video is about you. Most people assume loneliness is a social problem, a numbers problem, that it disappears when you add more people, more events, more noise. But there is a version of loneliness that gets worse with more people. A version that thrives in the middle of a party, a meeting, a family dinner. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who speak a language you understand perfectly, but who don't speak yours. And the harder you try to translate yourself, the more foreign you feel. This isn't arrogance, it isn't antisocial behavior, it isn't depression, though it can look like it from the outside. What it actually is far more specific and far more interesting, because the same cognitive machinery that makes certain minds exceptional at processing the world is the exact same machinery that makes those minds feel profoundly, quietly unseen. But here's what no one tells you. The loneliness isn't the problem, it's a symptom, and the cause goes much deeper than you think. There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive when you're sitting alone in a quiet room. It arrives in the middle of a conversation, at a crowded party, during a dinner with people who care about you. It's the loneliness of being present and invisible at the same time, of saying words that land, but meaning things that don't, of laughing at the right moments while something deeper in you watches from a distance, wondering why connection always feels like it's happening just slightly out of reach. Most people assume this feeling is a personal failure, a social deficiency, something to fix with more effort, more openness, more willingness to just relax and enjoy the surface of things. But what if the opposite is true? What if this particular loneliness isn't a symptom of something broken, but a side effect of something rare? What if the same mind that sees further, thinks deeper, and feels more intensely is the exact same mind that finds the ordinary frequency of human connection quietly, persistently insufficient? In the next 10 minutes, you're going to understand something that most people never get to name. Not just why intelligent people feel alone, but why that loneliness is so specific, so persistent, and so deeply misunderstood. This isn't a video about being better than anyone. It's about understanding the hidden cost of a mind that was built for depth in a world that mostly runs on surface. And once you see it clearly, you'll never mistake the gap for a flaw again. Picture this. You're at a social gathering. The conversation is flowing. People laughing, sharing stories, talking about things that everyone seems to find endlessly entertaining. And you're there, present, engaged, at least on the surface. But somewhere around the 3rd minute, your brain has already processed where the story is going. You already see the punchline. You already know the conclusion. And instead of enjoying the moment, you're watching it from the outside, like a film you've already seen. Or maybe it's a different scenario. You're in a meeting and someone proposes a plan. In the time it takes them to finish the sentence, your mind has already run the simulation. You've seen 3 potential problems, 2 better alternatives, and 1 outcome nobody in the room has considered yet. You say something. People nod politely. And then the conversation moves on as if you hadn't spoken at all. Not because they disagreed, but because the gap between where your mind went and where the room was simply too wide to cross in real time. What's fascinating, and what most people never connect, is that this isn't a personality flaw. It's not impatience. It's not arrogance. It's pattern recognition, firing at a speed that social situations weren't designed to accommodate. Your brain processes depth, complexity, and consequence faster than the average conversation moves. And the result isn't superiority. The result is isolation, a quiet, persistent sense that you are always slightly out of sync with the world around you. But here's where it gets more complex, because the gap isn't just about speed. It's about what you're actually hungry for. From a neuroscience perspective, highly intelligent minds are wired differently at the level of neural connectivity. Research suggests that gifted brains don't just process information faster, they process it across more regions simultaneously. Where an average mind follows a linear path from A to B, a complex mind is already at D, E, and F, while simultaneously questioning whether A was the right starting point. This isn't a metaphor. It's a measurable neurological reality, and it creates a perceptual world that is genuinely, fundamentally different from the one most people inhabit. This difference has a name in psychology: the theory of overexcitabilities, developed by Polish psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski. He identified 5 domains where gifted minds experience reality more intensely than others: intellectual, psychomotor, sensual, imaginational, and emotional. The intellectual overexcitability alone explains the exhausting hunger for depth, the compulsive need to question, the inability to accept surface-level answers. But it's the emotional overexcitability that most people miss, because it means that intelligent minds don't just think more, they feel more. And feeling more, in a world designed for average intensity, is its own form of exile. Here is where the social gap becomes a psychological wound. When your natural mode of engagement, deep, complex, intense, is consistently met with discomfort, deflection, or disinterest, your brain begins to encode a dangerous message. Not, "These people aren't ready for this conversation," but something far more personal. "There is something wrong with me for wanting it." This is the hidden cost the title promised. Intelligence doesn't just elevate your thinking. In the wrong environment, it quietly teaches you to hide it. And the loneliness that follows isn't about being alone. It's about learning to make yourself smaller, to fit into spaces that were never built for you. The feedback loop this creates is one of the most psychologically damaging patterns in high-functioning individuals. You hide your depth to connect. The connection feels hollow because it's built on a diminished version of yourself. The hollowness confirms that real connection is impossible. So you hide more, retreat further. And the walls get thicker with every interaction that proves the world prefers the performance over the person, until you forget which one is real. But the story doesn't end there, because there is a specific moment, a turning point, where this pattern stops being unconscious. And that's where everything either breaks or transforms. Let's make this concrete. Think about the last time you tried to share something that genuinely excited you. A concept, an idea, a connection you made between 2 seemingly unrelated things. You explained it with care, with precision, with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from something that truly lit up your mind. And the response? A polite smile, a subject change, or worse, a blank stare that lasted just long enough to confirm that the thing you found fascinating didn't even register as interesting to the person in front of you. And in that silence, something small but significant happened. You filed it away. You decided quietly not to share that kind of thing again, or consider the experience of small talk, the social currency that most people exchange effortlessly. For a highly intelligent mind, small talk isn't just boring, it's cognitively exhausting in a specific way. Your brain is built for depth, for consequence, for meaning. Asking it to sustain enthusiasm for surface-level exchanges is like asking a high-performance engine to idle indefinitely. The frustration isn't superiority, it's friction. The friction of a mind running at full capacity in a conversation that requires almost none of it. And that friction is consistently misread by others as coldness, arrogance, or disinterest, when what it actually is hunger. A deep, unmet hunger for a conversation that actually goes somewhere. Here is the paradox that defines this kind of loneliness. The more developed your mind becomes, the smaller the pool of people who can meet you there. It's not a judgment, it's mathematics. Deep intellectual and emotional resonance requires a specific overlap of experience, curiosity, and cognitive complexity that becomes statistically rarer as the standard rises. You aren't being elitist by noticing the gap. You are simply standing at an altitude where the air is thinner, and fewer people have made the climb. The loneliness at the top of that mountain isn't arrogance, it's altitude. And mistaking one for the other is what keeps so many intelligent people convinced that something is fundamentally wrong with them, when the truth is something far more liberating than that. What all of these experiences share is a single, devastating misinterpretation. The world reads your depth as distance, your intensity as intimidation, your need for meaning as an inability to relax. And over time, you begin to read yourself through those same lenses. You internalize the misreading. You start to believe that your natural way of being is somehow too much, too intense, too complex, too difficult to love at full volume. But here is where the path divides. Because the question isn't how to make yourself less. The question is how to find the spaces and the people where being more is exactly enough. The first shift you need to make is this. Stop treating your depth as a problem to be managed and start treating it as a frequency to be matched. The loneliness you feel isn't evidence that connection is impossible. It's evidence that you've been trying to connect on channels that were never designed to carry your signal. This is a targeting problem, not a fundamental flaw. And like any targeting problem, the solution isn't to change the signal. It's to find the right receivers. This means being ruthlessly intentional about where you invest your social energy. Not because you're better than anyone, but because your cognitive and emotional bandwidth is finite, and spending it on connections that consistently leave you emptier than before is not humility. It's self-abandonment. The second shift involves dismantling what psychologists call the over-adaptation pattern. This is the tendency of highly intelligent individuals to become so skilled at reading social environments that they automatically adjust their presentation to minimize friction. You become fluent in the language of every room you enter, but you stop speaking your own. The antidote isn't to become socially aggressive or deliberately difficult. It's to practice what researchers call selective authenticity. Gradually, strategically. Reintroducing your real perspective into conversations, starting in lower stakes environments, and paying attention to who leans in when you do, because they exist, and they are looking for you with the same quiet desperation you've been looking for them. The third shift is perhaps the hardest, because it requires changing a belief that loneliness has spent years reinforcing. You have to stop interpreting the absence of understanding as evidence of your own defectiveness. The gifted mind in an unstimulating environment is not broken. It is underutilized. A concert pianist playing background music at a shopping mall isn't failing at music, and once you truly internalize that distinction, the shame begins to lift. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking a far more productive question: where do I actually belong? And that question, unlike the first one, has an answer worth finding. The practical path forward has 3 components that research consistently validates. First, seek depth over breadth in your social connections. 2 or 3 relationships where you can be fully known are exponentially more nourishing than 20 where you perform. Second, find your intellectual tribe deliberately, not accidentally. Communities, disciplines, or environments where complexity is the norm, not the exception. Third, and most critically, learn to recognize the difference between solitude and loneliness. Because for a highly intelligent mind, solitude is often not the problem. It is the solution, the silence where your best thinking happens, the space where you are most fully yourself. The problem was never being alone. The problem was believing that being alone meant being unwanted. Here is the truth that reframes everything. The loneliness you've carried wasn't a verdict on your worth. It was a mismatch between your depth and your environment, and mismatches aren't permanent. They're navigational. They don't tell you that connection is impossible. They tell you that you've been looking in the wrong places, speaking to the wrong rooms, waiting for recognition from people who were never equipped to give it. Not because of any failure on either side, but because depth can only be met by depth, and depth by definition is rare. The intelligent mind that has spent years shrinking itself to fit deserves to hear this clearly. You were never too much. You were too much for the wrong spaces. And there is a profound difference between those 2 things. One is a life sentence. The other is a map, pointing you toward the places and the people where your complexity isn't a burden to be managed, but a language finally being spoken fluently, where your questions are met with better questions, where your silence is understood, where you don't have to translate yourself into something smaller just to be accepted into the room. The hidden cost of intelligence was never really about intelligence. It was about the years spent believing that the gap between you and the world was your fault. It wasn't. But here is what is within your control: the decision to stop performing smallness for an audience that never asked for your full self anyway. The decision to seek altitude instead of approval. The decision to let the right people find you, by finally, fully being findable, which means being exactly, unapologetically, completely yourself. Not the version that fits, the version that's real. And that version? It was never the problem. It was always the answer. The next time you find yourself in a room full of people and feel that familiar quiet distance settling in, remember this: you are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally unlovable or incapable of connection. You are simply a mind that was built for depth, trying to survive in a world that mostly rewards surface. And that gap, the one you've been interpreting as evidence of your own defectiveness, was never about you. It was always about the distance between where you are and where you belong. The hidden cost of intelligence isn't the loneliness itself. It's the years spent believing the loneliness was deserved. It's the slow accumulation of moments where you made yourself smaller, quieter, less. Not because you wanted to, but because the alternative felt too risky, too exposed, too likely to confirm what you feared most, that your full self was simply too much for the world to hold. But it wasn't. It never was. The world just hadn't shown you the right room yet. And some rooms you have to build yourself. And ask yourself this: what would you say, think, or become if you finally stopped editing yourself for an audience that never asked for the performance? If this changed how you see your own loneliness, tell me in the comments. I'd love to know what resonated with you. To continue this understanding, watch the next video here. And to understand human behavior at a deeper level, subscribe. We decode psychology every week.